Okay, as everyone is slowly returning, I shall be slowly welcoming all of you to the second part of today's session on space of our scientific questions then and now. It's wonderful to have this second last meeting this time round with the two Christophs, Dennis and Daniela, presenting today. And we will very soon hear the second Christoph of the day, Christoph Helmig. And perhaps I can very slowly start introducing Christoph Helmig. Christoph is professor of philosophy at the Universität zu Köln. His main research interests are in ancient philosophy, the history of Platonism, Aristotelianism, ancient epistemology, ancient concepts and concept formation, ancient and late ancient theories of place, there we have it, topos, and philosophy in ancient Rome. Among other books, Christoph Helmig has published a monograph on forms and concepts, concept formation, and in the Platonic tradition with de Gruyter in 2012. The collected volume I already mentioned with Graziano Ranocchia and Christoph Horn on space in Hellenistic philosophy, critical studies in ancient physics with de Gruyter in 2014, and more recently, another collected volume on the world soul, Anima Mundi, on the origins and fortunes of a fundamental idea with de Gruyter in 2019. Christoph Helmig's talk today is on some Neoplatonists and place, topos. Christoph, the floor is all yours.
Yeah, thank you very much for your kind introduction and also for the invitation. Also thanks to Michael Chase. So I will share my screen, hope that it works.
This is perfect, yes.
Okay, yeah, great. So it's about Neoplatonist views on place. And yeah, we are in late antiquity, so late ancient philosophers. And yesterday we already heard two excellent papers on late ancient views on time by Junior Barakat and Pantelis Koulitsis. And today I will say something about place. And so it's more or less the period 300 or the 3rd century AD to the 6th century AD. And yeah, we start with some general observations on Neoplatonic doctrines of place. So basically, it seems that Aristotle's account of place is much more descriptive. And so the Neoplatonists are really interested in the causes, intelligible causes of space and time. And they all seem, I mean, maybe there's one exception, but I didn't find one yet. So they all seem to, so they do not accept Aristotle's definition of place as the limit of the surrounding body, but they rather consider physical place as extension or interval, diastema. And this is interesting because, as you remember from Christoph Horn's talk, so basically Aristotle distinguishes between 4 candidates, so form, matter, interval, and his own definition. And also other elements of this fourfold distinction reappear in Neoplatonic theories of space. So, for example, place as form or place as matter. And I've already said that, yeah, Aristotle's account seems to be much more descriptive. And so if Neoplatonists ask what are the causes of space and time, it's important to take into account Neoplatonic theory of causes. So, for example, Proclus' Elements of Theology, paragraph 75, you can you read that every cause properly so-called transcends its resultants. So that means when we talk about proper causes, we talk about transcendent causes and not immanent causes like form in matter. So it's really about intelligible causes of time and place. So we have two important texts that Neoplatonists comment on. So this is Aristotle's Physics, and then of equal importance, or for some Neoplatonists even more important, is Plato's Physics, as laid out in the dialogue Timaeus. And here we have several elements. We have Fiora. So Christoph already talked about it. It's really something like matter space, and it's not a theory of private place. So Aristotle is really the place that is the place of something that is in this place, and Plato talks much more general about a place in the Timaeus. Then you have the world soul. So this is, of course, a bit of late ancient folklore. So the world is animated, and the world soul is a cosmic principle, and it is also a creative principle. So it's the principle that brings forth the cosmos, the visible cosmos. And so that means that the cosmos is really an ensouled living being. So this is all from Plato's Timaeus. And that also means for space, and I think this is crucial, that space is really ensouled space. So you don't have space without soul. So every spot, you can say, is somehow related to soul. And the formula is that soul is not in body, but body is in soul. And because soul is immaterial, it cannot be located, and so on. So, and very important for the Neoplatonic doctrine of place is Plotinus. And he makes some important distinctions. So basically, so we will see that in late antiquity, there are many similarities when we compare place and time. And Plotinus basically, he explains that time and place come into being because of the world soul. They really represent the activities of the world soul. And what is important, so just the background information. So in Neoplatonism, the idea is this: we have a theory of a first principle. It's called the one, and everything is derived from this principle. And this derivation is sometimes called emanation, and it is a process from pure unity to different levels of increasing division or partition. So these are the metaphors used. So, and the basic problem I've already outlined is what are the intelligible principles of place and time. So, and once again, it's interesting to look at Plato's Timaeus. So Plato's Timaeus has something to say about the intelligible principle of time, because he defines it as the moving image of eternity. But he doesn't really have to say anything about the principles of place. So he distinguishes three most fundamental principles of everything. So this is being, so the intelligible, and then becoming, the realm of becoming, and Fiora. And Fiora is basically the place where things that come into existence come into existence. So we have to ask the question, so what is actually the intelligible principle of place? So, and here are just some quotations of Plotinus. So first, where he says the body is in the soul, but this is already said by Plato in the Timaeus. Once again in 5.9, he says, but soul is not in the universe. The whole universe is in the soul. So we can say that in a way, soul is really the place of the universe. So remember when Christoph Horn asked whether Aristotle's universe is in place, it can't be because there's no body that is outside the universe. But in Neoplatonism, soul really seems to be the place of the universe. So, and then a really nice passage from 3.7, a treatise called On Eternity and Time. And there Plotinus uses a metaphor to show how soul brings forth time. No? So he says there, but like it and attending to be an image of it, first of all, put itself into time. So a soul put itself into time, Echronosen, or in German is even a nicer translation, die Seele verzeitigte sich. And that's the way how a soul brings forth time. And then the last quote, this is also very nice. So from 1:8, but there are many powers of soul, and it has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and matter is there and backs it, and we may say bothers it and wants to come right inside. And then he quotes Sophocles, so the tragedian, all the place is holy, and there's nothing which is without a share of soul. No? So once again, when we talk about place, it's really ensouled place. So then basically the most important source for late ancient theories on place is Simplicius' corollary on place together with Philoponus. But Simplicius is more important because he quotes more sources. And what is special about Simplicius' digression on place, so Pantelis has worked about it, that it is very different from the commentary. So in the commentary on the physics, Simplicius wants to explain Aristotle and doesn't criticize him. And in the digression, he really sets out a Neoplatonic theory of place, and he criticizes Aristotle. And for example, here he says, I wish to set out the objections brought against him and to bring to light the cause of his faulty argument about place. No? So paralogismus. Okay, and then I have just several Neoplatonists on place. So the first is Iamblichus. This is a very curious notion of place. So he talks about place as a corporeal power. So quote from Simplicius' corollary, so Iamblichus himself rejected other approaches that make place something unconnected with things in place and say that place is of like nature with things in place. So that's already in Aristotle, so place is isos. But of course, the question is how we interpret like nature. So Iamblichus continues and says, what view then clearly states the perfection of place and its kinship with being? It is that which treats place as a power of corporeal character, which sustains bodies and holds them apart, raising up those that have fallen and uniting those that are scattered, filling them up and surrounding them on every side. So I think here we see this curious aspect of late ancient theories of place. So place is somehow like form. Place has a power, and place orders. Place orders things that are in place. So, and the phrase he uses, corporeal, a power of corporeal character, so somato eides dynamis, it's a phrase that doesn't seem to occur anywhere else. And it can't mean, of course, that place in itself is corporeal, because otherwise we have this infinite regress Christoph Helmig was talking about. So it must somehow mean that place has a dynamis to interact with bodies, so that it can somehow influence bodies, their position, and somehow, but it's a very curious doctrine. So, and then even more curious is Proclus' doctrine of place. So he says that place is light. Place is light. And so this is really a doctrine no other Neoplatonist adopted, but it comes back in the Renaissance. So there's at least one Renaissance philosopher that takes the doctrine from Proclus. And of course, we can ask ourselves, why does Proclus have such a theory? So before in Plotinus, we said that soul was place of the universe. And so Simplicius mentions Proclus and mentions work now lost that Proclus must have written on place peri topu. And Simplicius thinks that his theory, so Proclus' theory, is rather innovative because he thinks that place is a body. And once again, we remember this can't mean that place is corporeal. Otherwise, we have a place in a place in a place. And we shall look now at Proclus' theory. So Proclus says that place basically has to be an extension, diastema, and it must be immobile. So that it takes from Aristotle, because if it were to move, it would require some place in which to move. And place would in turn require place. So, and then again, he takes this argument from that place is equal to what contains, what is contained by place. And he says, well, place contains bodies, so it must somehow be a body. But we will see that he qualifies this. He says it's a three-dimensional extension, but more in a geometrical sense. It is indivisible and it is immaterial. So that is a kind of contradiction in terms. So it's a soma ahylon, an immaterial body. And of course, we have to ask ourselves, well, what, where can we find such a body? And Proclus says, well, this is basically light. And so this has to do with late ancient theories of light. And he finds traces of such a theory of light in Plato's Republic. So in the Myth of Air, in the last book of the Republic, and he says, well, this is the simplest and purest of bodies, more rarefied even than fire. So that reminds us of the Stoic distinction between two types of fire. And so then the Republic, it says that the souls perceive a great shaft of light turning the heavenly spheres. And this, Proclus says, is light, is the place of the whole cosmos. And what I found interesting is to compare Proclus' doctrine with the doctrine of Plotinus. Of course, also in Proclus, the cosmos is ensouled. But why doesn't he say that soul is the place of everything? Why does he say that it must be light? So this has to do with another curious late ancient doctrine, the so-called vehicle of the soul. So in the history of ideas, this is also called a solar body. And so the idea is that we have a link between the body and the soul. So the question was, from antiquity onwards, how something immaterial can influence something material, and it's a kind of it's something between soul and body, and it's called the vehicle of the soul. And basically, when Proclus says that light is the place of the cosmos, he means that it is the vehicle that accompanies the world soul. So that's a bit, of a curious Neoplatonic metaphysics. And I have a quote here, but we can skip that. So, and now I want to introduce another term that is very important for Damascius and Simplicius theory of place, and that's measure. And Pantelius has already talked about it yesterday. So measure is not an instrument by which something else is measured, but measure has, is almost synonymous to form. It's a kind of ontological principle. And once again, I have a quote from Proclus' Elements of Theology. Proclus there says that every god, so every henad, so there's the one and there are different gods, different hennas, is a measure of things existent. So that's paragraph 117. And yeah, what does a measure do? He says, for every God has the character of unity. He defines and measures all the manifolds of existent things. For all manifolds are in their own nature indeterminate, but receive determination through unity. And a little bit further on, he talks about participation. So the Platonic doctrine of participation, and says by means of participation, the infinite acquires unitary form. So if you keep that in mind, that measure means something like form, a transcendent a principle. So, and then we come to Damascius' theory of place. So, and Pantelis yesterday already talked about Damascius' theory of time and the leaps. And he also talked about the three measures of Damascius' theory of time. And it is very interesting that place and time have the same measures. So we have, one could say, a strong isomorphism in late antiquity between place and time. So, and what are these three measures? So first a quote. But the appropriately stated definition of place seems to me to be that it is incorporeal but perceptible and in bodies, being the ordering of position of each thing in relation to others. No? So once again, this aspect of form. This, I said, was the view of Damascius, the head of our school, and was vouched for by Theophrastus and the divine Iamblichus. And yeah, the quote continues, it would not be a bad thing to listen to his words in his book on place, where he writes. So also Damascius seems to have written something on a place. So quote, it has become clear to us that there are three measures of three divisions or partitions, merismos or merismoi. No? So once again, so the metaphor is this, that everything emanates from pure unity, and so unity becomes plurality by means of these divisions. So, and there are no other division or partition in the world of change except these three, and no other measure. So, and what are these three? So first, there is number. So, and he says, well, number is basically also intelligible number is what separates being. So the fact that two things that exist are separate, so that's the task of number. So then we have time, and time itself is a measure, and time measures the endurance or the extension of change. So the pathos is kinesios. And finally, we have a place, and place is the measure of extension or dimensionality. So these, as I said, are the three measures of place and time. So, and the doctrine of Simplicius, so Damascius was the teacher of Simplicius, is very similar. So Simplicius adds an additional measure of place. So he distinguishes between four measures. And this is the quote. But I think that he should have defined, so Damascius, four measures, namely number, magnitude or size, place, and time. The first, number, measuring division. The second, extension. The third, all kinds of position. And the fourth, extension or duration in becoming. And then he concludes his corollary on place and says, so I beg pardon of scholars for these reflections on place and return to what comes next in Aristotle. I shall be concerned with the void. And if once again we look at these measures, so we can ask ourselves, why does he add magnitude or size? And he says, well, it's not only about things being different or being in a place or undergoing a generation in time, but it's also about the right size of something. As we can say, well, there's a right time for something, kairos in Greek, so there's a right size, and this seems to be the fourth measure, so a right size of an entity that comes into being. So, and I conclude the presentation with Philoponus. And so we have a recent monograph on Philoponus on place. And this is written by Johannes Papachristou, and he is present today. So I'm glad that you are here, Johannes, and you can correct me if I misrepresent Philoponus' doctrine. So Philoponus has a he's a very curious man. So he's a late ancient philosopher, but he was a Christian. He's a pupil of Ammonius, and he taught in Alexandria. And so one could say that in his theory of place is much less metaphysical, so compared to Damascus or Proclus and so on. But he is also very critical towards Aristotle. And I think some parts of his criticism are also very interesting for the history of science. So for Philoponus, place is basically three-dimensional. So once again, three-dimensional extension, but not corporeal. And it's an empty interval. Or he also calls it space, like Plato in the Timaeus, and it is void. And this is very interesting. So he says, well, within the interval, we have a void. It's immobile, incorporeal, always filled with bodies. No? So there is void, but it is always filled, and it is different from things in place. So, and what is really interesting about this theory, that in different aspects he differs from Aristotle. And the first aspect is he rejects, as other Neoplatonists, so Aristotle's definition of place as the limit of the surrounding body. Then he thinks, contrary to Aristotle, that void can exist. So one of the arguments of Aristotle in the Physics against void was that Aristotle claimed that there can be no movement in void. And Philoponus thinks that there can be movement in void, and this has to do with what we call in German Impulserhaltungssatz. No? So this is really discovered in late antiquity, so it's the conservation of the momentum. And so this is why he can, so he assumes that void exists, but it's not real void, let's say, like in the theory of the atomists, but it's void that is always filled by bodies. So, and he thinks that heaven must be in a place, no? The heavens. So once again, in Aristotle's theories, the heavens couldn't have a place. And in Aristotle's definition, and this is another thing, so late ancient philosophers thought that Aristotle's theory of place is two-dimensional. And so Philoponus claims, well, if it's two-dimensional, it can't contain body, because body is three-dimensional. And he thinks that Aristotle's definition, so it doesn't work because Aristotle's place can't contain body. It rather defines a position of a body in relation to other physical bodies. And the last thing, this is also something Aristotle mentions and Christoph mentioned. So there's a problem. On the one hand, Aristotle says place is immobile, but then he brings an obscure example of a boat on a river. No? So if we imagine that the boat is the place of something, then the boat is of course moving, and then you could say, okay, what's the place of the boat? It's the river, but the river in itself is also moving. And that's the problem of moving places. And so that's a little bit complicated in Philoponus' theory maybe Johannes can say something about it later. But in any case, he thinks that with Aristotle's definition, you cannot solve the problem of moving places. Thank you very much.